The intergalactic council chambers were dark and cold. The walls held records of 1,000,000 species across 1,000 star systems. Most of these species had technology that humans could not even imagine. They had walked among the stars for thousands of years. They had built cities on planets that orbited dead stars. They had weapons that could destroy entire worlds with one strike. Ambassador Krell stood before the council. He was tall, with gray skin and 4 fingers on each hand. He had come from the Vexther Empire, one of the most powerful nations in the galaxy. He was here to tell the council about Earth. He held up a small display that showed pictures of the planet. The planet was blue. It had clouds and water. It had 1 moon. "This world is called Earth," Krell said to the assembled members. "The species that lives there has only recently discovered how to leave their planet. They have 1 small space station. They have sent 2 spacecraft beyond their atmosphere. Their nuclear weapons are primitive. Their computers are slow. Their medicine is basic." The council listened without interest. They had heard about thousands of worlds like this one. Worlds with young species that had just discovered fire in a technological sense. These species always followed the same path. They would grow. They would make mistakes. They would eventually either destroy themselves or join the greater galaxy as junior members. "I propose," Krell continued, "that we place Earth on the restricted contact list. This species is not ready for the knowledge that exists in the greater galaxy. They are not ready to know about other worlds. They are not ready to know about us. We should let them develop for at least another 1,000 years before we allow any contact." The vote was quick. The council members from the Xylothian Empire raised their hands. The members from the Vexther raised theirs. Even the older species, those who had walked the stars for 5,000 years, voted in favor of Krell's proposal. Earth was placed on the restricted list. No species would contact humanity. No technology would be shared. Humanity would be left alone to develop or destroy themselves. None of the council members knew that on Earth, in a small facility in the mountains of North America, a man named David Torres was making a decision that would change everything. David Torres was the commander of Earth's space program. He was 42 years old. He had spent his entire adult life trying to get humanity off their planet. He had faced failure after failure. Governments did not want to spend money on space. People did not believe in the dream of traveling to other worlds. But David Torres had persisted. He had trained. He had planned. He had built. 20 years of work had finally produced results. Earth's newest satellite constellation was complete. It orbited the planet in a perfect pattern. The satellites could see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. They could detect signals from deep space. They could identify patterns that natural phenomena would never create. David stood in the control room with his team. Large screens showed the position of each satellite. A woman named Maya Rodriguez sat at the main console. She was 30 years old. She had a degree in physics and mathematics. She had worked with David for 15 years. She was the best at what she did. "Boss, we have something," Maya said. She did not sound excited. She sounded serious. David walked over to her station. On the screen, he could see a pattern of signals. The signals came from deep space. They repeated every 3 hours. They were too regular to be random. They were too complex to be natural. "What is this?" David asked. "I do not know," Maya said. "But it is not from Earth. No human technology creates signals like this. The pattern is intelligent. Someone is sending these signals on purpose." David felt something move inside his chest. Not fear, not excitement. Something deeper than either. This was the moment that every person in the space program had worked toward. They were not alone. Something out there was trying to communicate. "Tell no one about this yet," David said. "I need to think about this." But Maya was already running more analysis. Within 2 hours, she had identified the source. The signals came from a location about 200 light years away. The signals had been traveling through space for a very long time. They were old. Very old. Perhaps hundreds of years old. If they sent these signals hundreds of years ago, they might be dead now, Maya said. Or they might have advanced beyond anything we can understand. David left the facility and drove home. His apartment was small and simple. He had never married. He had no children. His life was his work. He sat in the darkness and thought about what to do. The government would want to hide this information. They would be afraid. They would create committees to study it. They would pass the decision up to higher officials. Years would pass. By the time they made a decision to respond, the original senders might have given up hope that anyone would hear them. David made his choice at 2 in the morning. He would have Maya create a response. The response would contain mathematics. It would contain images. It would contain a simple message in as many formats as possible. It would say that humanity was here. It would say that humanity was listening. He knew this decision could cost him his career. The government might arrest him. The world's governments might become angry with each other over who owned the space program. But David had not built the satellite network to follow rules. He had built it to reach across the stars and touch something unknown. When he returned to the facility the next morning, Maya was waiting for him. She had not slept. She knew what he wanted before he asked. "I thought you might want to do this," she said. For the next week, they worked in secret. No other members of the team were told what they were doing. They created a response message. They encoded it 17 different ways. They made it strong enough to travel through the noise and radiation of space. They made it simple enough that any intelligent species would understand the meaning. On the 8th day, they sent the message. It traveled away from Earth at the speed of light. It would reach its destination in 200 years. But they were not expecting an answer from the point where the original signals came from. They were transmitting their position. They were saying that if anyone was out there, anywhere in the galaxy, they should know that Earth existed and that humanity could hear them. Maya watched the transmission complete. The message was gone, sent into space, unretrievable. Whatever came next, they had started it. Neither of them knew that a ship was already on its way to Earth. Neither of them knew that the Intergalactic Council was already in chaos. Neither of them knew that everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was about to change. David put his hand on Maya's shoulder. "Whatever happens now," he said, "we did it." Maya nodded. She was afraid, but she was also alive in a way she had never been before. They had sent a message into the dark, and the dark was listening. The response came 3 weeks later. David was sleeping when the alarm sounded. The alarm meant something had happened. Something important. He was dressed and in the control room within 8 minutes. The entire staff was already there. Everyone was staring at the screens in shock. A ship had entered Earth's solar system. The ship was massive. It was longer than Earth's largest cities. It was wider than mountains. It moved without any visible engines. It simply appeared where it had not been before, as if it had stepped through a door from one place to another. The ship held position at a distance of 1,000,000 miles from Earth. It did not come closer. It did not attack. "It is sending a signal," Maya said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "It is asking for communication." David stared at the screens. There was no time for preparation. There was no time for government approval. There was no time for anything except action. "Respond," he said. "Tell them we are ready." Within minutes, the governments of Earth knew what was happening. The news spread through the world's military forces. War rooms opened. Presidents and generals called emergency meetings. Scientists worked around the clock to understand what was happening. But David had already made the choice that mattered. He had already said that humanity was ready to listen. The ship sent coordinates for a meeting location. The location was at a neutral space station that had been built 100 years earlier. The station orbited between Earth and the Moon. It had been designed as a research facility, but it had never been fully used. David made another decision. He would not send a military commander to this meeting. He would send a diplomat. He called Christopher Mills. Christopher was 55 years old. He had spent his life in diplomatic service. He had negotiated treaties between nations. He had learned to speak carefully and listen better. He was the best person for this job. Christopher arrived at the facility with his team. He brought translators. He brought videos and recordings of human culture. He brought images of art and music and literature. He brought samples of human food. He was preparing for first contact the way he would prepare for any negotiation, but this was different. This was with a species that might be millions of years older than humanity. What do I say? Christopher asked David. Say the truth, David replied. Say that we are here. Say that we want to learn. Say that we mean no harm. The shuttle carrying Christopher and his team launched from the space station. It traveled toward the alien ship. The journey took 3 hours. During that time, no one on Earth spoke. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to see what came next. The shuttle docked with the alien ship. The airlock opened. Christopher Mills stood and prepared to exit the shuttle. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. He had faced difficult situations before, but this was the most important moment of his life. This was the most important moment of all human history. The alien was waiting in the docking bay. His name was Krell, though Christopher could not pronounce it correctly. Krell was 8 feet tall. His skin was gray like stone. His eyes were large and black like space itself. He had 4 fingers on each hand. He moved slowly and deliberately. He was not threatening, but he was not friendly either. He was simply observing. I am Christopher Mills, Christopher said. I represent the people of Earth. I greet you as one intelligent species greets another. Krell studied him. The silence lasted for 30 seconds. To Christopher, it felt like 30 hours. Then Krell extended his hand, placing his 4-finger palm against Christopher's 5-finger palm. I am Ambassador Krell, he said. His voice was clear, translated through technology into English. I represent the Intergalactic Council. I have come to inform you that your world has been discovered. They spoke for 6 hours. Christopher listened more than he spoke. Krell told him about the galaxy. He told him about the Council. He told him about the law that prohibited contact with primitive species. He told him that Earth had been marked as restricted. He told him that humanity was not supposed to know about the greater universe. But you sent a signal, Krell said. You reached out into the darkness. You demanded to know if anyone was listening. So I have come. The Council will have to make a new decision. Christopher understood what this meant. His people had broken a rule that had existed for thousands of years. They had forced the Council to acknowledge them. There would be consequences. Will they attack us? Christopher asked directly. I do not know, Krell said. It depends on what I tell them. It depends on what I believe about your species. I came here expecting to find an animal species that had somehow developed radio technology. I came here expecting to find creatures that did not truly understand what they were doing. But instead, I found you. I found someone who can think, someone who can speak with purpose, someone who can make decisions. Krell was silent for a moment. Then he continued. The council voted to keep humanity in isolation, but they voted without knowing the truth about your species. They thought you were primitive. They thought you were not ready. But I am beginning to think that they were wrong. Back on Earth, David watched the signals come through. The conversation was being transmitted in real time. The entire world was hearing what Krell was saying. World leaders were in their war rooms. Scientists were analyzing every word. Military forces were preparing for attack. But David was thinking about something else. Humanity had reached out into the darkness. Humanity had refused to accept isolation. Humanity had demanded to be heard. And now, the universe was listening. Maya Rodriguez stood beside David's chair. She had been there since the beginning. She had sent that first signal into space. She had helped create the message that had reached across light years and touched the stars. Now, she was watching as everything changed. What happens next? She asked. I do not know, David said. But we have made our choice. We have reached out. We cannot take it back. Now, we have to face what comes. On the alien ship, Krell was making his own choice. He would return to the council. He would tell them the truth about humanity. He would tell them that Earth was not a primitive world. He would tell them that humanity was a species worth knowing. And then, he would let the council decide what to do about a species that had refused to accept the rules of the galaxy. The next 24 hours would determine everything. They would determine whether humanity would be destroyed, or whether they would be allowed to take their place among the stars. Krell asked the question that changed everything. The meeting was happening on Earth now, in a military bunker hidden beneath a mountain. Christopher Mills and Krell sat across from each other in a secure room. David Torres was present, along with scientists and military leaders. The world's governments were connected through secure video links. Everyone was watching. Everyone wanted to hear what would happen next. Tell me about your earliest history, Krell said. Your oldest civilization. Where did your species come from? Christopher did not answer immediately. He looked at David. David nodded. There is something we need to show you, Christopher said. We have not told anyone else about this. But you need to know the truth before the council makes any decisions about humanity. They traveled to the Pacific Ocean. It took 14 hours to get there by military transport. Krell and his team came with them. The destination was a research facility built into the side of a cliff. The facility was hidden. Few people on Earth even knew it existed. Inside the facility, they descended into tunnels carved from solid rock. The tunnels went down 1,000 feet below sea level. The tunnels were cold. They were damp. They smelled like salt and aged. At the end of the tunnels, they found the ruins. The ruins were enormous. They stretched for half a mile underground. The structures were made of metal that never rusted. The metal was black like space. The buildings were shaped like nothing Krell had ever seen, but they were unmistakably built by intelligent hands. What is this? Krell asked. His voice was different now. His voice held something that Christopher had never heard before. It held doubt. A scientist named Dr. Robert Hayes stepped forward. He had been studying the ruins for 30 years. He had dedicated his entire life to understanding what he was about to explain. This civilization existed on Earth approximately 50,000 years ago, Robert said. We have dated the structures using radioactive analysis. We have examined the materials. The technology is advanced, but it is also ancient. Very ancient. Krell walked through the ruins. He touched the black metal. He looked at the symbols on the walls. The symbols were similar to records that the Intergalactic Council had. But that was impossible. This was Earth. This was a primitive world. This was a world that had only recently left its atmosphere. There's more, Robert said. They took Krell deeper into the mountain. They showed him the genetic records that the ancients had left behind. The ancients had recorded their own DNA in a format that could last 10,000 years. In the genetic records, there was a clear message. The ancients were human. They were exactly the same species that walked Earth today. "This is not possible," Krell said. But it was possible. He could see it with his own eyes. Robert continued with the explanation. "We do not know what happened to this civilization. We have theories. We believe they reached the stars. We believe they built a great society. We believe that something happened that caused their collapse. Perhaps there was a war. Perhaps there was a disaster. We do not know. But something ended their civilization. Some humans survived," Robert continued. "They went into hiding. Over thousands of years, they forgot their own history. They regressed technologically. They became what you see today. We are the descendants of the survivors. We are the children of the fallen." Krell was silent. He was staring at the genetic records. He was comparing them to records that he carried with him in his mind. Records of the oldest species in the galaxy. Records of civilizations that had risen and fallen. "If this is true," Krell said slowly, "then your species is not primitive. Your species is not young. Your species is the oldest in the galaxy." "We do not know that," Robert said carefully. "We only know that we had a civilization here. We do not know if we were the first." But Krell knew. He knew because the Intergalactic Council's historical records went back very far. They went back to the time when the first intelligent species had begun to explore space. There was a gap in those records. A period of 5,000 years where no contact existed with any known species. Historians had assumed that the gap was because the recording systems had failed. But now, Krell understood the truth. The gap existed because the first species had disappeared. "You were the first," Krell said. "Your species was the first intelligent species to rise in the galaxy. You built an empire. You spread across the stars. And then you fell. But you survived. You came back. You are rising again." Christopher Mills could see the weight of this. Information hitting Krell, the ambassador from the Intergalactic Council, was trying to process the fact that the species he had come to dismiss was actually the oldest species in the galaxy. It was the species that had started everything. "What will the Council do with this information?" Christopher asked. "I do not know," Krell said. "Some will see you as a threat. Some will see you as the rightful rulers of the galaxy. Some will deny that this evidence is real. The Council will be in chaos." Over the next week, Krell studied the ruins with his own technology. He used tools that could see through solid rock. He used devices that could read the atomic structure of materials. He confirmed that everything Robert had said was true. The evidence was real. The civilization was real. Humanity was the first. Krell transmitted his findings to the Intergalactic Council. The Council's response was silence for 36 hours. Then, emergency sessions were called. Every species in the Council demanded to send their own scientists to Earth. Every species wanted to examine the evidence. Some species wanted to quarantine Earth until they understood what had happened. The Xylothian Empire demanded that humanity be destroyed. If humanity had been the first, then perhaps they remembered the old wars. Perhaps they remembered technology that could destroy entire star systems. The Xylothians did not want to take the risk, but Krell spoke against the destruction. He argued that a species that had fallen and risen again had earned the right to exist. He argued that a species that had survived 50,000 years of regression and still had the intelligence to reach the stars, again was not a species to be feared. He argued that humanity was an opportunity, not a threat. The debate lasted for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Earth held its breath. Humanity waited to see if they would be accepted into the galaxy or if they would be destroyed. David Torres stood on the cliff above the Pacific Ocean. He looked down at the water. Somewhere beneath those waves, his ancestors had built a great civilization. Somewhere beneath those waves, his ancestors had fallen into darkness. And somehow, without knowing it, his people had risen again. The wind was cold. The sun was setting. David thought about the choices that his species had made. He thought about reaching out into the darkness. He thought about refusing to accept isolation. He thought about sending a message that would change everything. Whatever the council decided, humanity had already made its choice. Humanity had already reached for the stars. And now, the universe would have to answer. The council chamber was hostile. This was not a place of science or reason. This was a place of politics and fear. The Xylothian commander stood at the center of the chamber. His name was Thes. He was powerful and old. He had lived through 3 galactic wars. He had seen entire civilizations destroyed. He did not trust humanity because he did not trust any species that had proven it could fall. If this species was the first, Thes said, his voice loud and sharp, then they know secrets that we do not know. They have technology that we have not discovered. They have weapons that we cannot imagine. When they were strong, they ruled the galaxy. When they fell into darkness. But they are rising again, and they will remember what they once were. The council members listened. Many of them were afraid. They had built their civilizations on the assumption that they were the dominant species. The revelation that humanity was actually the first species changed everything. It meant that humanity had rights that other species did not have. It meant that if humanity rose to power again, the other species would have to answer to them. I propose, Thes continued, that we quarantine Earth. We seal the planet. We prevent any contact with this species. We study them from a distance. And if they prove to be a threat, we destroy them. We end the problem before it becomes something we cannot control. The vote was not immediate. The council members debated. The older species, those who remembered the old wars from historical records, were most afraid. The younger species, those who had only known the current order, were curious. They wanted to learn from the ancient civilization. But fear won over curiosity. The quarantine vote passed with a majority. Earth would be cut off. No species could land on Earth. No technology could be shared. Humanity would be isolated. But Krell protested. He demanded that the council hear from a human representative before making the final decision. You are judging a species based on fear, Krell said. You are not judging them based on what they have actually done. Show them the courtesy of explaining what you plan to do. Give them a chance to speak. The council agreed. A human representative would be allowed to address the chamber. Christopher Mills was not chosen for this task. Instead, Maya Rodriguez was chosen. She was younger. She was a scientist. She was a member of the generation that had sent the first signal into space. Maya prepared for her speech carefully. She did not prepare facts or arguments. Instead, she prepared her heart. She wanted the council to understand what it meant to be human. Not what humans had been 50,000 years ago, but what humans were now. The intergalactic council chamber was vast. It was designed to hold thousands of species. Hundreds of them were present, watching Maya as she walked to the center of the chamber. She was 30 years old. She was alone. She was facing the most powerful nations in the galaxy. I am Maya Rodriguez, she said. Her voice was clear and strong. I represent the people of Earth. I represent a species that you believe is a threat. But I am not here to argue that we are not a threat. I am here to tell you what we actually are. She paused. Every being in the chamber was listening. My species fell 50,000 years ago, Maya said. We fell into darkness. We lost everything that our ancestors had built. We became primitive. We became barely more advanced than the animals that lived on our world. But we did not disappear. We survived. We persisted. And we slowly, generation by generation, learned how to be intelligent again. Maya walked across the chamber. She was not afraid. She was not nervous. You are afraid of us because we were once powerful. But power is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what it means to rise from nothing. What it means to survive when everything tells you that you should give up. 50,000 years of darkness, Maya continued. 50,000 years of living in caves and learning to use fire. 50,000 years of being forgotten. And yet we survived. We did not disappear. We did not become extinct. We became stronger, not in technology, but in spirit. We learned what it means to never give up. The council was quiet. Maya could see that her words were affecting them. You are right to be afraid, Maya said. You are right to question what we might become. But you are wrong about what we will become if you destroy us. You are wrong about what we will become if you imprison us. 50,000 years ago, my ancestors had power. They had technology. They had everything that you have now. And they lost it all. Do you know why they lost it? Because they used their power to fight each other. Because they used their technology to destroy each other. Because they forgot that power is meaningless without wisdom. Maya stood in the center of the chamber and looked directly at Tess. You are afraid that we will come back and take everything from you. But we already know what that leads to. We already know the cost. We paid that cost 50,000 years ago. We learned that lesson. We are not going to repeat it. I am asking you, Maya said to the council, to give my people a chance. Not because we are strong, but because we have learned. Not because we deserve power, but because we understand the cost of power. We are not the species we were 50,000 years ago. We are not your threat. We are your opportunity. If you kill us, you kill the first species that ever walked among the stars. You kill the species that discovered space travel. You kill the species that learned what happens when power runs without wisdom. And you are left alone with the knowledge that you committed genocide. If you accept us, if you let us join the galaxy as equals, then you gain something that no other species has. You gain partners who have already lived through the cycle of rise and fall. You gain partners who understand that survival is not about being the strongest. Survival is about being wise. The chamber was silent. The silence lasted for a long time. Then Krell stood. He raised his hand in a gesture of support. Other ambassadors began to stand. The younger species stood first. Then some of the older species. One by one, they stood until more than half of the council was standing. Thess sat in his chair. He was watching Maya with an expression of anger. But he could not argue against her words. The council was moving. The vote would be different this time. The new vote was closer than the first. But it passed. The quarantine was lifted. Humanity would be recognized as a sovereign species. Humanity would be allowed to develop at its own pace. Humanity would be given the chance to rise again. When Maya left the chamber, David was waiting for her. He embraced her without speaking. There was nothing to say. They had faced the most powerful force in the galaxy, and they had survived. Not through weapons or force, but through truth and wisdom. Earth had been given a chance. Now humanity had to prove that they deserved it. 2 years after the Council's decision, the first human ship left Earth's orbit heading for Mars. The ship was called the Dawn. It carried 200 scientists and engineers. It carried equipment and supplies for building a permanent settlement. It carried the hope of humanity. David Torres stood in the control room and watched the ship leave. He was 60 years old now. He had spent his entire life working for this moment. He had sent the first signal into space. He had chosen to break the rules that governments had created. He had believed that humanity was more than what they had been told they were. The ship left without ceremony. There was no celebration. David understood that this was just the beginning. They had won the right to reach the stars, but now they had to build something worthy of that right. Maya Rodriguez had been chosen for a different role. She was now the chief liaison between Earth and the Intergalactic Council. At 32 years old, she was the most important diplomat in human history. She spent more time in space than she spent on Earth. She spent more time talking to aliens than she spent with her own people. But she was not alone in representing humanity. Christopher Mills had been given the role of negotiating trade agreements with the other species. He was building economic partnerships that would help humanity accelerate their technological development. He was ensuring that Earth would not develop in isolation, but would grow as part of a larger community. The ancient ruins beneath the Pacific Ocean became the most important research facility in the world. Scientists from every species in the Intergalactic Council came to study the records left by the ancient humans. They wanted to understand what had happened to the first civilization. They wanted to learn the technological principles that the ancients had discovered. But the most important discovery was not technological. The most important discovery was cultural. The ancient humans had left records of their philosophy. They had written about what it meant to be intelligent. They had written about the mistakes they had made. They had written about the wars that had destroyed their civilization. Reading these records, modern humans understood their own nature better. They understood why they had survived when other species might have given up. They understood why they had reached for the stars, even when the universe had told them to stay at home. David spent his final years before retirement reading the ancient records. He sat in the research facility beneath the mountain and read about his ancestors. He read about the cities they had built on other worlds. He read about the dreams they had. And he read about the catastrophe that had taken it all away. But he also read something else. He read about the children who had survived. He read about the people who had chosen to preserve knowledge instead of weapons. He read about the decision that his ancestors had made to remember, even when remembering was painful. They chose to survive as humans, David said to one of the researchers. Not as warriors, not as conquerors, just as humans. They chose to preserve what made them human, not what made them powerful. On the 5th anniversary of first contact, the entire planet of Earth was invited to celebrate. Krell came to Earth in person. He traveled with Christopher Mills to the Pacific coast. They stood on the cliff together and looked out at the ocean. Your people have changed, Krell said to Christopher. How? Christopher asked. They have stopped being afraid, Krell said. When I first arrived on your world, I could feel the fear. I could see it in every face. You were afraid of us. You were afraid of your own power. You were afraid of what your ancestors had been. And now? Christopher asked. Now, you are proud, Krell said. But your pride is not arrogant. It is humble. You are proud because you know what you have overcome. You are proud because you know that you have earned the right to stand among the stars. But you do not believe that you are better than anyone else. You only believe that you are equal. The first human settlement on Mars was completed in year 3 of the contact era, as the historians had begun to call it. The settlement was named Eden. 5,000 humans lived there. They built their homes. They grew their own food. They created their own government. Mars had become a second Earth, but Mars was not the last. Human colonies were established on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Human scientists worked alongside alien scientists to unlock the secrets of the ancient ruins. Human engineers helped build the next generation of space stations and slowly, without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, humanity became an equal partner in the intergalactic community. 10 years after first contact, Maya Rodriguez stood before the Intergalactic Council again. But this time, she was not asking for acceptance. She was announcing that humanity had chosen their role in the greater galaxy. "We will not be warriors," Maya said to the assembled beings. "We will not compete with you for power. Instead, we will be teachers. We will share what we have learned from our fall and our rise. We will teach your young species how to survive hardship. We will teach your old species how to find hope when hope seems impossible. We are the species that fell and rose again. We are the species that remembers what it means to be tested. We are the species that knows that power is not the same as survival. This is our gift to the galaxy. This is what we will give in exchange for the right to exist among you as equals." The council accepted this role, and over the following years, humanity became known throughout the galaxy, not for their technology, but for their wisdom. Other young species, struggling in their own development, would come to Earth to learn. They would read the ancient records. They would listen to David Torres and Maya Rodriguez and Christopher Mills speak about survival and hope. David retired at 75 years old. He had accomplished everything that he had set out to accomplish. He had reached for the stars. He had helped his people find their place in the universe. He had given humanity a future. On his last day in the space program, he stood on the cliff above the Pacific Ocean with Maya. The sun was setting. In the sky above, human ships and alien ships moved between the stars. Humanity had returned to the place from which they had fallen. "Do you think they would be proud?" Maya asked. She was asking about the ancient humans. The humans who had built the great civilization that had fallen into darkness. "I think they would understand," David said. "I think they would see themselves in what we have become. Not what they were, but what they should have been. We are the second chance that they never had." The sun continued to set. The stars began to appear in the darkness. The first intelligent species that had ever walked among the stars was walking among them again. But this time, they walked with wisdom instead of arrogance. This time, they walked with hope instead of fear. Humanity had learned the greatest lesson of all. The greatest strength was not power. The greatest strength was survival. The greatest strength was the refusal to disappear, the refusal to accept darkness, the refusal to forget who they were. Earth's future had begun.